Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks all for coming to what promises to be both an illuminating and exciting conversation. This dialogue series is part of a joint effort by the Trivedi Center for Political Data of Ashoka University and the Center for Policy Research to create a platform for a rigorous database non polarized, relatively calm discussion on politics. And one of the things that we do is after every state election to cut through the noise and actually offer a data based analysis to make sense of how to interpret the elections. Yesterday's results have been particularly exciting, glass half full, glass half empty, depending on which side of the fence you're on. And it poses very, very important and interesting questions about what happens 5 months from now. And to give us some deeper insights into both understanding better how to interpret the elections, and also draw from that interpretation what we need to learn from and keep in mind as we head towards May 2019. We have Nilanjan Sirkar and Gilles, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce your last name, with us. I was about to do it, and I thought there's just too many people who know I'm doing it wrong, so I'm just not going to do it. um, with us today. We'll start with Nilanjan, who is going to walk us through give us a macro picture, and through that, give us some insights into what yesterday means for May 2019. Over to you, Nilan.
Thank you, Yamini. It's nice to be presenting on elections again. It's been a while, actually. So I'm just going to sort of give a lay of the land, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to put the election results yesterday within the larger context of the elections that we've been seeing recently. So what I want to do is I want to compare the recently concluded Gujarat election last year with Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. And there are reasons to do this. So if we look at the 2014 elections, the BJP won almost 70% of its seats in just 6 states. And these are 6 states: Bihar, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and UP. So out of the 282 seats, almost 70% just come from these very, very 6 states, right? These 6 states. So it's a highly geographically concentrated victory. And so what happened in these states is the BJP almost completely swept. It had a strike rate of well over 90%, which means it won more than 90% of the seats that it contested. And so that's the kind of arithmetic that allowed the BJP to win 282 seats, get a majority of the parliament on just 31% vote share, right? So contesting in very, very small areas, sweeping all of the seats, and not being competitive in large parts of the country. That's actually what the map looks like in 2014. So a natural inference is that if the BJP is to do well in 2019 in the upcoming national elections, it's going to have to do well in these sorts of states again. So the strategy for any kind of opposition party isn't to wipe out the BJP in these states, it's to do some damage, right? Because the BJP effectively swept in these states. So all the states I have up there are not in the Hindi belt, but one way of thinking about where the BJP did well is they did well in the Hindi belt, the Hindi speaking part of the country, and a couple of other states like Gujarat, Maharashtra. So that sort of makes up the electoral map and the vote bank, really, for the BJP. So the reason why this election, and most of you are familiar with what results came out yesterday night, this morning, unfortunately, given what happened with the election commission, the BJP did not do well in the Hindi belt states. And so what I'm going to do is try to put this in perspective, try to understand what it means for the BJP. And you can tell by the title of this talk that I don't think it's the death knell for the BJP in 2019, but the BJP should be very, very concerned about what happened yesterday. So I want to sort of start thinking a little bit about how voters vote, right? And this is based off of a long-standing set of work that we've been doing at CPR, spending time in the field at various state elections. So I've worked with Ashish Ranjan, who's sitting here, with Bhanu Joshi, who's doing his PhD at Brown now, with Anirban Chaudhary, who's doing a speech at Berkeley, who's sitting back there, with Kushdeep Malhotra, who is doing her PhD at Temple, whom I don't see. But there are, several of us who have gone in the field and try to understand exactly how voters are behaving. And we've been writing a series of working papers. So here's a sort of a short snippet from a piece I wrote in the print based on these field notes. The perplexing juxtaposition of caste-based patronage against government dissatisfaction is not unique to another region. A young labourer residing in the village of Dimni in a village in Dimni constituency from the Tomar or Thakur caste is explicit in describing how the BJP continues to win, stating the BJP government has literally done nothing here. All of the roads and drains you see were built by the local mandir, but the BJP candidate is a Tomar, and I have to vote for him. If someone else wins, they will conduct another BPL survey, and we will lose all of our BPL cards. So, the reason why I want to bring this up is that Madhya Pradesh, a state in which the BJP had ruled for 15 years, is in many ways a hard case to understand why economic voting may actually cause a flip. It's a state that the BJP had overrun. The BJP hadn't really been legitimately challenged for the last several elections, and it controlled all patronage networks. The point of this sort of quote is to show exactly how the BJP was very intelligent in playing caste, building its caste constituencies, and really a stable caste and religious constituency that made it very, very hard to lose. And that in the face of non-performance on the delivery front and on the economic front. So the reason why I bring this up is that these are really countervailing forces, right? So we can think of caste patronage or patronage from the party in government towards certain groups as being something that gives it staying power and sticking power. And non-performance on the economy and people reacting to that, people being sort of economic voters or people being retrospective or prospective voters, voting based on some kind of accountability-based mechanism as being something that suggests that the BJP should be thrown out of power. So that's a larger sort of framing for thinking about what was at play here. And what we want to say is that when there's sufficient anger against an incumbent party, caste patronage may not be an efficient electoral strategy. And the reason is, how many different caste groups can you really pick? You have to pick a few. There are many, many caste groups in a constituency. So later on in this piece, I talk about a group that is not included in the standard caste patronage. And while somebody who is normally a core BJP voter can't bring himself to vote for the Congress, he ends up voting for an independent candidate. Right? And so this is just to give you a sense of what was sort of in play. So if you cannot win voters when it comes to economic delivery, what other strategies can you use? Can you use Hindutva? Can you use some other kind of electoral strategy? This is the sort of question that we're going to be looking at in 2019 to try to get a sense of what the BJP does to deal with the kinds of losses it faced in these elections. Okay, so I'm going to start very quickly with some of the data that you've seen if you've seen some of my other presentations in the Gujarat election, trying to understand what happened. So when we look at the map in the Gujarat election, we see that in 2017, that sort of bottom left corner, the area around Rajkot, that is sort of where the Congress won a lot of its seats. Now, for those of you who know Gujarat, you'll know that there's something unique about that area, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So when we look at the BJP strike rates, and again, the strike rate is the percentage of seats you win as a percentage of the number of seats you contest, we see that comparing the last two state elections, the one in which the BJP didn't perform as well, which was last year, 2017, and the election before that, the BJP has an extraordinarily high strike rate in big cities, 90%. Where it seems to have done much worse is in other areas, so semi-urban, semi-rural, and rural areas. So if we are to just sort of do some sort of fancy modeling thing, this is a technique called splining, and we want to understand sort of how the proportion of the urban population in the assembly constituency correlates to the BJP strike rate. You can see that as the population gets fairly urban, the two sort of curves converge, which is to say the BJP does no worse in urban areas in 2017 as compared to 2012. But what you can see is that when the proportion of the urban population is very low, the bottom sort of falls out of the BJP support base, right? There's a much lower strike rate in 2017 as compared to 2012 in Gujarat, when we have a very, very low urban population, so a much higher rural population. So let's take this a step further, right? So rural in and of itself doesn't mean farmer, right? So if we are to take rural populations in India, a large percentage of the rural population is commuting to the cities, is engaged in labor. But what we hear a lot about in the news today is about farmer agitation. So is that kind of farmer anger showing up in a place like Gujarat last year? And a lot of the evidence points to yes. So what I've done here is I've just taken rural constituencies. And in those places where the agricultural share of the labor force is less than 50%, you see that the strike rates are almost unchanged in the last two elections. But in Gujarat, in those places where the proportion of the labor force that's in agriculture was approximately 2/3 or more, you see a huge drop in its strike rate. So it really shows that in a place like Gujarat, a lot of its poor performance, the BJP's poor performance, can really be pinned on anger among the farmers. So the hypothesis we want to test here is to see, first of all, does this kind of anger continue in places like Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan? But also, is it just localized to farmers or does it spread beyond farmers? So this is just, as I said, we've been running these numbers pretty quickly. The data came in very late last night in the Election Commission. But now these numbers are final. If we are to look at the number of seats the BJP won, so even in the national elections you're able to break it down by state assembly segments, we see that in the last state election in 2013, the BJP swept in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. 165 seats in Madhya Pradesh, 163 seats in Rajasthan. That it's very closely related to how it performed in the national election. Actually, there isn't a huge difference between how it performed in the 2013 state election and the national election. In the national election, it won 192 seats in Madhya Pradesh and 180 seats in Rajasthan. And we see that this time in 2018, a much poorer performance for the BJP in each of these states, right? In each case, of course, they have lost the state. The Congress party, along with perhaps coalition partner, is likely to form government. And the question, of course, is if I were to draw a phantom bar for 2019, what does that look like? How many state assembly constituencies does it win? So these are some graphs from a piece I published this morning in Hindustan Times, looking at the BJP strike rate. So this is BJP's strike rate. The lighter color is for 2013, and the saffron color is for the current election. You can see the strike rates are dropping across the board. What you can see is that while there is a significant drop in rural areas, just as there was in Gujarat, now we're seeing the rot starting to spread for the BJP. It's also dropping in urban areas quite significantly. So it's a big loss across the board. It's not just a farmer loss. It's not just farmer anger. But we might want to see whether the farmers themselves have some effect. So I've also broken down, just like I did with Gujarat, rural constituencies by whether they're largely agricultural or not. And you see something funny happening in Madhya Pradesh. They actually do better in non-agricultural rural constituencies in 2018 as compared to 2013. But again, the BJP is taking a huge hit among farmers in Madhya Pradesh, and across the board in Rajasthan. The BJP is taking a hit in both agricultural, so even among farmers, and non-agricultural rural constituencies where we have lots of laborers and commuters, right? So what this is saying is that we are seeing a significant amount of anger among farmers in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. That trend continues to hold from Gujarat, but now the anger seems to have spread. Again, just for completeness, I've modeled the agricultural share of the population against a predicted BJP strike rate in 2013 and 2018, and again, you're seeing that kind of divergence, the kind of thing that we saw in Gujarat. Okay, so just finishing up quickly, and then we'll move on to Gilles' presentation. I want to say that, farmer anger has been a large theme in a lot of the analysis of this current election, and perhaps what we've been talking about over the last year and a half. That is true. That's something we also saw in Gujarat. But the BJP survived in Gujarat. BJP formed government again in Gujarat. Perhaps that's because approximately half of the state probably now is urban. And also agriculture, the actual agricultural belt in Gujarat is quite localized. It's actually localized exactly to this region that went all green around Rajkot. But we now sort of see when we look at Madhya Pradesh, when we look at Rajasthan. I haven't talked about Chhattisgarh. We see very similar trends in Chhattisgarh across the Hindi belt. The anger seems to have spread. It's not just on farmers. There seems to be anger based on the kinds of reports that we got when we traveled on the ground, with a larger economic situation. No jobs, rise in petty corruption, development seems to have come to a halt. So whether or not there's been success in central schemes, it doesn't seem to override what a lot of voters perceive as a poor economic performance across the board. And I just want to sort of end with this simple idea that, what I started with. The reason why the BJP should really be worried about what happened yesterday or maybe today, based on when you looked at the results, is that these are not just places where the BJP needs to hold the Congress at par or regional parties at par. When we're talking about losses in places like Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan, we're talking about places where the BJP had won more than 90% of the seats, and one would think that even if things don't go as well, they should try to win at least 70-75% of the seats. If they perform in the national election like they did yesterday, then they basically have no chance of winning in 2019. And with that, I'll hand it over to Gilles.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming for this talk. So what I'm going to do rather briefly is to give you basically a glimpse on a number of different data points that have come out of of yesterday's, or actually this morning's results, and maybe try to show you a couple of data visualizations that you might not have seen in the media. So, as Niranjan mentioned, the data came quite late. Actually, the last states came rather in the middle of the morning today, so it's been a little bit of a mad rush to put all this together. Thank you. And so, if I'm perfectly honest, I'm going to discover the content of some of these charts at the same time as you are. All right. So before I get into the broad, performance picture, a quick word on turnout. It's absolutely essential to always start reading an election by looking at the turnout or participation. And what these three elections, and I'm going to focus on Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh here, show us is that you basically have a bit of continuity both in Rajasthan and in Madhya Pradesh. We know that in Indian elections, both at the national and at the state level, turnout has been consistently rising. Greater appeal for electoral democracy, but also better registration of voters by the election commission brings in new voters election after election, and we see those trends continue. In the case of Rajasthan, also in continuation of a trend that appeared the previous elections, women have slightly outvoted men, which of course does not factor in the sex ratio. Madhya Pradesh shows also slightly continuously, growing turnout. The only maybe exception is actually Chhattisgarh, where you have a very tiny dip, which may not seem significant, but takes a particular signification when you consider that Chhattisgarh has returned perhaps the most spectacular results yesterday. The Congress actually swept the state, won a victory that even the BJP never won in terms of amplitude, in terms of simple seat share. But that happens in the context of a slightly decreasing turnout, and it's a good opportunity to remind that electoral swings in India very often happen in the context of decreased turnout rather than increased turnout. Simply from the fact that some voters who would have supported the other party or the incumbent are a bit demobilized, maybe not angry enough to the point of voting for someone else, but maybe just not showing up to the poll. So we don't have precise data on that, but it's something that we have seen. The classic example is Mayawati in 2007 wins a single majority in UP for the first time in 30 years, but with a turnout that collapsed at 46%. the implication is that you cannot really translate those or interpret those swings in terms of popular surge. What you really have is a reconfiguration of vote distribution among a voting population that somewhat remains more or less stable. Now, the first takeaway from these elections is that the victory of the Congress or the defeat of the BJP, for once, are actually synonymous and are absolutely comprehensive. And so, if you look at sub-region, I'll come to sub-region in a moment. So, okay, first of all, so if you look at main parties' independent vote share in the three states, you see that both for Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, there's nothing out of the ordinary. What makes those elections out of the ordinary, of course, is the context, the fact that they come as a contradiction to a period of growth of the BJP. But if you put this data into a longer timeline, I mean, these are shifts that we've seen before. There's nothing really usual with large swings of vote share in Rajasthan. In Madhya Pradesh, we're basically back to sort of a pre-Chauhan configuration in terms of distance between, Congress and BJP are basically neck to neck. It's only in Chhattisgarh where you have a really important swing, and for the first time. You see that how in Chhattisgarh the votes have been, both parties, Congress, BJP, have been neck to neck since the creation of the state, and now for the first time you see a significant gap. So of course these are very aggregate figures, and what you need to look at are the sub-regions. Here in terms of seats, of course, the effect is stronger owing to the disproportionality effect of the electoral system. It's really the geographical distribution of the votes that determine how a vote share will translate into seats. And it is quite interesting that despite the fact that Congress and BJP have more or less equal vote shares across those three states, except Chhattisgarh, the conversion into seat has very clearly favored the Congress. Now, if we look at sub-regional trends here for Rajasthan, you see what I mean when I say that the defeat of the BJP was comprehensive. They really fall in vote share across all sub-regions. And these are vote share drops that the BJP has not experienced anywhere since 2014. Kota division, for example, the BJP loses 10% vote share. The Jodhpur division, the BJP loses also 12% vote share. These are enormous differences. And similarly, the gains of the Congress, well, quite mechanically, because since these two states being bipolar, also register very important gains across. So there's no, as we've seen and as Nilanjan showed in the case of Gujarat, or in the case of Haryana, or in the case of Kashmir, or in the case of Karnataka, there is no particular sub-regional concentration of performance. It's really, really spread out. There was no time to put up a slide on urban and rural seats, but we know, glancing from the data, that the BJP has lost nearly half of its seats in cities across those three states, which of course is very significant. If we look at Madhya Pradesh, and I'm not too sure why we have so many sub-regions of Madhya Pradesh, it's basically the same picture. The BJP loses across the territory, barring maybe the Jabwa Hills or the Kaimo Plateau, but otherwise the losses are quite significant and consistent. And similar reverse story for the ANC. So that tells you that there is a state-level story that works. I mean, Nilanjan and I always like to remember that you have to factor in, local context, and that the local interactions between MLAs, voters have to be factored in, and state elections tend to be very localized. But here you clearly have a statewide narrative that cuts across various categories of voters. Chhattisgarh, the Congress gains are more important in the Bastar area, but equally, actually very high across the state. The BJP here is actually more resilient. They improve their vote share in the Northern Hills and in the Bastar Plateau. It's really in the plains that they lose a little bit, but the losses are not considerable. So it's really the Congress catching up, gaining new terrain, gaining new voters here that helped it to make the difference. So something I like to look at is also the performance of individual candidates, because we always look at election results, or we always interpret election results in terms of state level or government level incumbency, so the capacity of a party to basically retain power in a state. But very often, even when you have continuity of power between elections, as we've seen in Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, those kind of stable patterns can hide a lot of volatility. And so if you look at individual incumbency, so the ability of an individual MLA to retain his or her seat, you get a much better sense of how competitive actually these elections have been. And here, both Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh are basically giving us quite extraordinary figures. First of all, the number of incumbents. Less than half of the sitting MLAs reran. Either they decided not to run, more likely they were changed or kicked out by their own party, who tried to prevent anti-incumbency by fielding new faces every time. And only 48 incumbent MLA, that's less than a quarter, actually got re-elected. Congress fielded a large number of individuals who have been MLAs in the past, so they've really used their old pool of political affiliates to recruit their candidate, and with some measure of success. The BJP only gained 8 new seats, but retained 65 of the 163 seats that it previously held in the assembly. Congress won 82 new seats, mostly unsurprisingly to BJP MLAs, but also retained quite well. So you can see that the performance of the Congress is really an expansion rather than the incidental result of a broader localized reshuffle. And the chart you have below gives you the overall percentage of first-time MLAs, which stands in 2018 at 57%. There is no time to actually tell you a longer story about why this is interesting and why this is important, but it is an important feature in Indian politics that political careers tend to be very short. The political life expectancy of Indian netas is notoriously low, and that's particularly true in a state like Madhya Pradesh, and even more so in Rajasthan, even more so in Madhya Pradesh, where 77% of the new MLAs, so those who have been elected yesterday, actually are first-timers. So that has a lot of implications on the loss of cumulative experience of parliamentarian. It has also a lot of implications on the literature on patronage networks, because if patronage networks worked, then why would people feel the need or the urge to keep changing, keep booting out their MLAs, regardless across parties? And in Madhya Pradesh, 120 seats changed hands overall, so there was actually quite a lot of retention, but mostly with new candidates. You only have 32 MLAs in this assembly who actually were elected in the previous assembly, which is an extraordinarily small proportion, right? So, somewhat related topic, the question of caste representation. And so what we can see here in Rajasthan is that you basically have a continuation of trends, and that those trends have been quite stable between different caste groups, upper caste on the top, SCs and intermediary caste, essentially Jats, somewhat around 18%, and a number of other groups below. Here you have the breakdown by the breakup by caste, by specific jati within two of these caste categories, but it basically tells you that trends are actually quite stable. And this is something that I've started to observe, looking at this kind of data across states, that there is a number of states where, regardless who wins, the overall caste distribution of seats actually remains really stable. And sometimes at the seat level. So you could see, for instance, that the electoral map will project two very different images, but if you were to put caste on those same map, they would basically give you almost exact same picture, which basically tells you that regardless of volatility and change and swings and whatever happens to political parties and individual candidates, there is still a lot of ground stability in terms of caste-based representation. What I've done here is to isolate what the MLAs will belong to groups that you could consider dominant. In the case of Rajasthan, so that would be Gujars, that would be Yadavs, that would be Banya, Rajput, Jats, Brahmins, and Minas among the STs. And what you see is that consistently over time, both for Congress and the BJP, the proportion of dominant MLA is very high, because among those who rest you have the reserve category. So the residual actually category of non-dominant, non-reserved caste actually is very small, and that's still a large proportion of the population. And so both parties basically cater massively to groups that are locally dominant. And it's a good opportunity to remind that in a state like Rajasthan, and I would suspect it's the same story in Madhya Pradesh too, you do not have transversal caste alignments behind specific parties anymore. Most mainstream parties have followed the same strategy of inducting members, co-opting members of local elites in order to basically enhance their chances of winning seats. It's the old Congress system formula, co-optation of local elites, except that the definition of who is a local elite, of course, is far more fluid, far more heterogeneous, and so forth. And it goes on to show that, sociologically speaking, parties like Congress and the BJP are more and more indifferentiated. Something we know to be true in Gujarat, something that we now know to be true also for Rajasthan, and there was unfortunately no time to put up the Madhya Pradesh data, but it would have given you a fairly similar picture. Finally, two last issues. Those three Hindi belt states actually traditionally do well in terms of, or better rather than well, in terms of women representation. Rajasthan used to be the second state in terms of ratio of female MLAs. Madhya Pradesh was not very far, and neither was Chhattisgarh. What we see in these elections is that the overall representation of women has actually dipped a little bit. So there was a continuing process of increase, of improvement of women representation, but we know that faced to adversity, when parties are faced to very competitive elections, they are reticent to take risks, what they perceive to be risks, to be more precise, by fielding a larger number of women candidates. And so, in a way, the cost of competitiveness and the cost of the openness of these elections is, the overall representation of women. Similarly, for the representation of Muslims, quite frankly, has historically been very low across these three states. I only mentioned Rajasthan here because the other states barely have actually any Muslim MLAs. And we see that there has been a dip of Muslim candidates. And that sort of confirms this newly adopted strategy of the Congress Party to refrain from fielding as many Muslims as they traditionally or historically used to do, in a way to anticipate or avoid having to face what they, some Hindu backlash. And so here, obviously no one expects anymore the BJP to distribute tickets to Muslim candidates. So it's really, the onus is really on the other parties. And Congress here basically took that decision. And the last slide about women representation in Madhya Pradesh and in Chhattisgarh shows similar kind of dip in Madhya Pradesh, and for the same reason of competitiveness, and a more stable picture in Chhattisgarh. We have data at TCPD on the performance of women candidates that basically shows that there is absolutely no reason to think that women make weaker candidates than men. And I'm quite sure that once we start churning the data for those women who've been elected, they would show that they were elected with vote share as high, if not higher, than their male counterpart within their own party. So that concludes it. The main takeaway is really the comprehensive character of this defeat, the fact that the Congress has made gains everywhere, and that clearly completely changes the situation ahead of the summer elections in 2019. Thank you very much.